Oh man, this is going to be such a fun top 5. I'm so excited to do this, to debut this new spin on it, as we do a little something called Me versus AI top 5s. So a little bit of a setup on this. The subject this week is top 5 1980s professional wrestlers. I became a wrestling fan in early 1986, and I thought it would be fun to go over some of these old school names. So I have my top 5. There won't be any honorable mentions this week. But then I asked ChatGPT the question about top 5 1980s professional wrestlers. But the thing with AI is if you ask for its favorites, it's an opinion, so it doesn't really have an opinion per se. So what I did was I asked ChatGPT who were the top 5 best. And I left it totally subjective. I asked ChatGPT to make sure you gave me reasons why you put these people in your top 5. It was basically a coin flip to see whose list went first. I decided to go with mine first. I'll briefly go over all my top 5s, and then I'll go through ChatGPT's actual list with the full text and everything. I had debated doing the ChatGPT AI one in some sort of robot voice like Dr. Spatzo, if you remember that old DOS program. But I didn't want to make it something where it was so stupid, unless you want me to do that in the future. I'll leave that up to you if you want robot voices for AI in the future. But enough of the setup. Let's get to the actual punchline. Here is my top 5 1980s professional wrestlers. Starting with number 1, Hulk Hogan. He may be kind of a D-bag human, but when I first became a wrestling fan, there was nobody bigger than Hulk Hogan. He crossed over into mainstream, hosted Saturday Night Live, was in movies. He looked like a superhero. 6'8", 300 pounds, tanned, although he was balding, but still. He was the larger-than-life character during that rock and wrestling era of the mid-1980s. And whether you love or hate him as a human, there's no denying his impact on the wrestling business. Number 2 is Andre the Giant. When I first started watching wrestling, Andre was already on the way down. His mobility was very limited due to the acromegaly, the giantism that gave him his unique look. But still, he main evented WrestleMania 3 in 1987, and by then he was having trouble moving. He probably had to suck down a couple of bottles of vodka just to get out there. But Andre, he was known as the 8th wonder of the world. He was known wherever he went because he was such a unique character. And he was another one that crossed over into film, The Princess Bride. He was on TV, he was in commercials. So even though by the time I saw him, he was more coasting on his legacy because that's all he could do, he was a huge star throughout the entire 1980s and was probably WWF's biggest star before Hulk Hogan won the world belt in 1984. Number 3 is Rowdy Roddy Piper, the Joker to Hulk Hogan's Batman. He's another one that crossed over into mainstream, into movies, They Live. He was a massive star for wrestling fans when he was on MTV and he beat up Cyndi Lauper and her manager. He was in the main event of the very first WrestleMania and would nearly cause riots as a heel with some of the horrible things he would say about the crowd and other wrestlers. And then in late 1986, he turned babyface, became a good guy, had a big match at WrestleMania 3 in 1987, and then he went off to Hollywood and came back in 1989. But every great hero needs the great villain, and Hulk Hogan wouldn't have been as big as he was if Roddy Piper wasn't as bad as he was. Number 4 is Macho Man Randy Savage. If you asked me who was my favorite wrestler of the 1980s, my early days, I would tell you Macho Man Randy Savage. He was smaller, relatively, compared to the other giants of WWF. Did a lot of cool moves, cut a lot of really cool promos where he was probably coked up. For those interested, go to YouTube and search Macho Man promos 1980s, especially the backstage ones. He was an alternative to Hulk Hogan. Became the world champion for a year, main evented WrestleMania 4 and 5. He crossed over more into mainstream in 1989 and then mostly or more in the 1990s with his Slim Jim commercials. But he's just another all-time great. Fun fact, the very first wrestling show I ever watched was February 1986 on NESN, New England Sports Network, from the Boston Garden. The main event was Macho Man Randy Savage winning the Intercontinental title from Tito Santana by whacking him with a foreign object and getting the pin. And finally, number 5 on my top 5 favorite 1980s professional wrestlers is Nature Boy Ric Flair. I won't lie, growing up in the Northeast, I typically only saw WWF, but I also started to read the wrestling magazines, and there was this blonde-haired guy on the cover of a lot of them with this crazy-looking big gold belt who just looked like a star. And that's who Ric Flair was. Limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, wheeling dealing, son of a gun. His heyday was definitely the 80s. He was the best wrestler as far as in-ring work went, bar none. Hogan was a bigger star, Ric Flair was a better wrestler. And even though I was a WWF fan growing up, I knew who Ric Flair was. But now, the moment you've all been waiting for, who did ChatGPT select as their top 5 80s professional wrestlers?
The 1980s was a significant era in professional wrestling, known for its larger-than-life personalities and iconic moments. While it's challenging to narrow down the top 5 wrestlers of that decade, here are 5 individuals who left a lasting impact, along with reasons why they are considered among the best.
Yeesh, very professional, ChatGPT.
1. Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan, whose real name is Terry Bollea, is arguably the most iconic wrestler of the 1980s. He was the face of the World Wrestling Federation, WWF, during this era, helping to usher in the rock and wrestling era. Hogan's charisma, incredible physique, and ability to connect with fans made him a global phenomenon. Hogan's countless title reigns, memorable catchphrases like Hulkamania, and his legendary feud with Andre the Giant at WrestleMania 3 solidify his place as a top wrestler of the 80s. 2. Macho Man Randy Savage. Randy Savage was known for his flamboyant personality, unique style, and exceptional in-ring skills. He held the WWF World Heavyweight Championship and played a pivotal role in the success of the WWF during the 1980s. Savage's intensity, colorful outfits, and famous catchphrase, "Ooh yeah!" made him a fan favorite. His rivalry with Hogan, especially at WrestleMania 5, is considered one of the greatest feuds in wrestling history. 3. Ric Flair. Ric Flair, often referred to as the Nature Boy, was the embodiment of a classic wrestling heel during the 80s. He was the NWA World Heavyweight Champion and known for his incredible technical skills and charisma. Flair's legendary promos and matches with stars like Ricky Steamboat, Dusty Rhodes, and Sting helped elevate him to the status of one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time.
3 for 3 so far, right?
4. The Ultimate Warrior. The Ultimate Warrior, real name James Ellsworth, brought a unique, intense energy to the wrestling world in the late 80s. He had a colorful face, painted persona, and was known for his explosive, high-energy style. Warrior's victory over Hogan at WrestleMania 6 to become the WWF World Heavyweight Champion is one of the most iconic moments in wrestling history. His presence and unique character made him a standout in the 80s.
So right there, ChatGPT already lost us by claiming his biggest moment was not in the 80s. That's fine. Maybe they can recover with their number 5.
5. The Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson.
Okay, how do they sum this up?
The Rock and Roll Express was a tag team that had a tremendous impact on professional wrestling during the 1980s. They were known for their high-flying, fast-paced style and had memorable feuds with teams like the Midnight Express. Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson's ability to connect with fans and their longevity in the industry cement their place as one of the top tag teams of the 80s.
So that was their top 5. They went 3 for 5, I think. Warrior is borderline because his best moments came in 1990. And I also didn't ask for tag teams, but they gave me a tag team as their number 5. No Andre the Giant, no Dusty Rhodes, no Ricky Steamboat, no Roddy Piper. That's fine. But that wraps up this week's top 5. What did you all think of the Me versus AI debut? Definitely give me some topics that you think might do well as a top 5 with AI. I have to figure out how to word it appropriately because they don't have favorites. You can't ask them, for example, who are the most hated wrestlers because they'll say something like they can't hate or they don't feel that, at least yet. But I hope you enjoyed this new wrinkle on the top 5. I'm sure there'll be more like this to come.